Hello everyone. So Atelier Resleriana is finally releasing tomorrow on Global, and I am sure you're all wondering, what do I reroll for? What are the meta units? What are the best characters on release? And hopefully I can answer all of your questions. I will be going through and tiering all of the 3-star units. Those are the highest rarity characters in the gacha. I will talk a bit about the lower rarity units, but we're not going to tier them. You probably don't want to reroll for any of them, even though some of them are quite good. So what do you need to know about these characters? Well, first off, the units in Resleriana are divided into 4 types. You have attackers, breakers, defenders, and supporters. And this kind of determines, sort of how good they are. A well-rounded team comp will have varying, amounts of each. It depends on the content. So your attackers are your main damaging units. Every team will probably want at least 1, a lot of times 2, maybe even 3 for easier stuff. It depends. They can either be focused on area damage or single target damage, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each. Most attackers are single target focused. Some of them do area damage. Area damage is generally weaker, but it has its uses. And you generally don't want utility on your attackers because it means they're sacrificing damage for that utility. That's how the game is balanced. So pure attackers are going to be stronger because you're getting utility elsewhere. Your attackers are doing the damage, so attackers that do more damage are just better. So breakers. Breakers break enemies. That's stun in this game. It's very important. They can be area or single target focused as well. Area is generally better for most content, but single target is very useful for bosses and a few things. And a well-rounded team will usually have 1 or 2 breakers. Breakers are going to be very high priority in your team, but they're actually not a super high priority for reroll, and I'll get into why later. Defenders. Enemies will target defenders first most of the time if they don't have a skill that goes past the defender, but that's not common. It's not really a thing. So if you have a defender in the team, you can be, pretty assured that enemies are going to attack it. It's good for mitigating RNG. They generally have higher defense, but the thing about defenders is they're not really required until the game adds harder content, which is going to be a couple months down the line. And supporters can either be buffers, debuffers, or healers. So there's a bunch of different types of supporters. Healing is very good in this game, but it's going to be pretty unnecessary for a while. And generally, when a supporter is meta, it's because they have a really strong generic damage buff as opposed to like a heal or a debuff. But that's kind of the gist of it. Also, each character in Resleri has 3 skills. A fast skill they can use on their turn, a normal skill they can use on their turn, or a burst skill, which is their special attack. The thing about burst skills is you generally want to use burst skills on your attackers. So the burst skills on the other 3 roles are not a huge consideration for their power. So even if like a defender or supporter's burst skill looks really good, because they're not an attacker, it's still, part of their kit and can be useful, but it's like lower priority because you really want to prioritize damage. Okay, so now that we know about the roles, we can go on to making the tier list. These are all of the 3 stars available on release. And let's just go start with first one, Mari. So Mari is an S tier unit, but I would put her in A tier for rerolls, and here's why. She is an area breaker. So we have Mari right here. She's a breaker. Yeah, she does area break. Area break is very, very good at the start of the game. You definitely want an area breaker. But the thing about Mari, while very good, one of the units they give you for free, Shalistera, is also an area breaker. She's a breaker that does area damage. Shelly and Mari are the only two area breakers on release, and you definitely want an area breaker in your team. But because you get one for free with Shalistera, Mari is lower priority for reroll. If it wasn't for Shalistera being free, Mari would be an S tier. So you don't feel too bad about her if you get her, and that's why I put her in A. But because of Shalistera, Mari's an A tier. She's still a very good unit, and she stays relevant for basically ever. Breakers in general will always be relevant with like one exception, which I'll go over later. All right, so we have Mew. Mew is also from Atelier Mari, and she is going to go in the F tier, unfortunately. Mew is quite bad for a number of reasons. Basically, so she is a physical attacker, and she's just kind of weak. For one thing, the meta for a couple months at the start of the game will be geared towards magical damage. There's magic damage and physical damage in this game. Physical damage is very weak for a long time, but also she is an area attacker. Her second skill does area damage, and it's just not very good, unfortunately. And not only that, she's not focused on area damage. Her burst skill, her special attack, is single target. So she's like kind of confused, right? If both of them were area, she would probably be fine and have a niche on doing area damage. But because only the normal skill is area, she just ends up being really weak. It's kind of hard to explain if you haven't played the game, but being a physical attacker, not having like a clear focused niche, like she's just not very good. That's basically the gist of it. All right, now we have Yudi. Yudi is a defender, and she is going to go in the C tier. So she's actually she's decent, but kind of the thing with the defenders on release is that the 1 and 2 star defenders are just as good, if not better. So when you need a defender, Yudi is kind of unnecessary. She is solid, but she is almost never used down the line. She gets power crept really hard. And early on, you don't really need defenders much. They're kind of unnecessary. So like, she's absolutely usable. She's not a bad unit by any means, but I would not reroll for her at all. I mean, unless you think she's cute. Like, look at that wink. She's adorable. If you want to roll for her because she's cute, that's fine. All right, so Raze. Raze is a breaker. He is a single target physical breaker. He's going to go in the B tier. One thing I haven't gotten in too much so far is speed. Speed determines turn order at the start of battles. Raze is a bit slow. Generally, you want your breakers to be fast so that they can stun the enemy before your attackers start doing damage. So Raze being a bit slow hurts him, and also he's a single target breaker, so he's a bit more niche than an area breaker like Mari. But he's pretty solid as a breaker. You would not be unhappy to get him at all. He has good debuffs attached to his skills. Unfortunately, he's physical focused, and like I mentioned before, physical attacks don't really become part of the meta until a bit later when they get some more support. So on release, for all the release content, physical attacks are going to be a bit weaker. However, Raze does become quite useful later on. Okay, so Exel. Exel is a supporter, and he's going to go in the F tier. He's really bad. How to explain how bad Exel is? So his skills are, his gimmick is kind of weird because he's a supporter, but his skills are inflicting debuffs, which is a status ailment of burn. For easy content, you don't need burn. It's very weak. And for harder content, everything resists burn, so you're never inflicting it anyways. So his gimmick is basically useless, which means his only decent skill is his normal skill, which is a single target heal. which is okay. It's a very large heal, but it only hits one ally. Generally in this game, when you need healing, it's area healing. So single target heals are a bit weak. The buff is a bit weak. It's very specific, only fire damage. Fire damage is a magical damage type. Yeah, just in general, he's not good. So he goes straight into F tier. He is basically never used. All right, Rorona. So Rorona is an ice attacker. She's a magical attacker. Now, under normal circumstances, she would probably go in either the B or the A tier. I haven't thought about it too much. But this is a reroll tier list. She goes straight into F because everyone gets her for free. Everyone gets her for free when the game launches, so you absolutely do not want to see her in your rerolls. Duplicates are very, very bad in this game for characters. You don't really roll for or want to see duplicate characters. So despite Rorona being a fairly solid attacker, yeah, F tier for rerolls. You don't want to see her. All right, next we have Aisha. She is C tier. She is a supporter. She's a single target healer. Single target healing is decent. It's useful, but it's unnecessary. And it's not even particularly good in harder content. Like, she's basically the same as Yudi. If you get her, she's useful, but she's not really particularly good long-term. She's not significantly better than other 1 and 2 star healers. So basically, yeah, she's fairly mediocre. All right, Keith. Keith, I personally put him in F tier. C tier might be more accurate, but I really hate his kit. So Keith has a weird gimmick. First of all, he's a single target breaker. And he is very slow. Well, not very slow, but pretty slow. He has 220 speed. Fast characters usually have 260. So Keith is pretty slow. You want your breakers to be fast. But he has a weird gimmick where he's like split attributes. So he has ice attacks and fire attacks. And his main attribute's fire, and it's just weird. The game, he's the only character like this in the game that has split attributes. And the game just doesn't really work like that. Yeah, anyways, it's hard to gear him. He's not fast. Breakers kind of need to be fast. He's not good. He doesn't fit into any meta teams. He's just, yeah. You don't want Keith. All right, Odilia. I don't know whether to put Odilia in the C or B tier. I would probably put her in the, I guess I can put her in the B tier with like a B minus, I would say. Probably like a B minus, like between C and B. She is an attacker. She is lightning element, so a magical attacker. She has an area damage burst. So the thing about area damage in this game on your attackers is it's a bit niche. Because usually you'll have like one tanky enemy surrounded by a few like smaller enemies. So you either pick the smaller enemies off with single target damage, or you one-shot them with an area burst. So area damage is much better on burst than it is on the normal skill, like with Mew. Because you usually are using area attacks as like a one-shot tactic instead of like grinding down the enemies. So area burst is good, but she has this weird paralysis gimmick where she gets extra damage when the enemy is paralyzed. Her normal skill inflicts paralysis, but a lot of late game enemies will resist that, and it's just kind of awkward. Her numbers aren't quite high enough to justify this like really hard to use gimmick. And there are other attackers in the game with area bursts that are just as good. So She is not bad by any means, but she also doesn't have a super defined place in the meta. She is useful, but not great. All right, Logi. Logi actually is also going to get a B-. He fits the exact same niche as Odilia, believe it or not. I believe it's up here. He also has a normal skill, single target, a burst skill, area damage, with some conditional effects. The conditional effects are easier to activate because you will be breaking targets with your breakers. So he's a bit better than Odilia in that regard, but he is physical. He is a physical attacker. And like I said before, physical attackers are not very good at the start of the game. He is Slash, though, one of the physical damage types, which helps him later on. Slash ends up getting a lot of support a couple months into the game's lifespan, so that's very good. But he's still a physical attacker, so he's not great at the start of the game, but he's not bad either. So he's fine. All right. Now we have Corneria. Corneria is actually another A tier. So Corneria is a breaker. She is a physical breaker. When it comes to breakers, whether they're physical or magical doesn't matter too much. She is very fast. She has high speed, which is great for a breaker. And she just does good break damage. She's a single target breaker. Her main skill is single target, and her burst is actually area here, which can be useful if you get it, because it will break all of the enemies at once. It does a ton of area break damage. But like I said before, you usually want to be using bursts on your attackers. But when the burst happens to land her, it's not a bad thing. Corneria is quite good. She also gets a bonus from being useful in synthesis. Each character gets some bonuses for crafting items, crafting gear in the game, and Corneria is one of the meta units for gear crafting. So I would probably say she's an A+. You definitely want to have Corneria for crafting, and she's also good in combat. Very good unit. All right, on to Oscar. Oscar is once again a C tier. He is another defender that's fairly mediocre. The defenders in the starting pool get power crept very quickly, and they're more or less replaceable, like I said earlier, by 1- and 2-star defenders, so there's not really much benefit to having Oscar on your roster. All right, and next we have Fierce. Fierce is gonna go into A tier. She is a magical wind attacker, and she is very weird. So Fierce has a unique gimmick to her, where she is very slow, 200 speed. Most characters are between 220 and 240, with some faster. So Fierce is the slowest character in the game. However, she has delay on her skills, knockback. What this means is that at the start of the game, a lot of single target content, she can actually cheese by soloing it. Because it is possible to use her skills to do infinite knockback if it's 1v1. So she's very good. She can clear all of the hardest content on release by herself if you sort of like figure out the way to do it. It's not trivial. She doesn't just clear it for free, because it only does the knockback if the enemy's HP is 50% or higher. So you do have to one-shot them from like 50 to 0, right? Not one-shot, but you'd have to 50 to 0 them immediately. Otherwise they will get a turn and she will die. But she's very good. She also just does pretty decent damage for an attacker. She ends up falling off a lot after a few months because she is slow, and because the knockback gimmicks don't work very well once the content starts getting harder. But all of the release content she can do perfectly fine. So she goes in A tier. Also, she's my favorite. Fierce is super cute. I love her. So no bias, promise. Yeah, Fierce, very good. Alright. And we're gonna skip Pravda and Sophie for now. They're actually not in the release pool, and I'll go over why they're here in a bit. Okay, so next we have Risa, and Risa is our first and only S-tier unit. Yay! Risa is the highest damaging attacker in the game on release. Period. She does way more damage than everyone else. It's not even fair. So Risa is the meta attacker. If you get her, you're very happy. That's all there really is to say about it. There's nothing special about her. She's pure damage. You want her. She's very good. Moving on, we have Resna. So Resna is a bit of a special one. I will put her in the A tier because she is quite good. And she is a supporter, but there's a few caveats here. So how to explain Resna? I would put her in S tier if it wasn't for the fact that your starting unit is a 1-star version of Resna. So this one right here, which is an attacker. And this Resna is also quite good. You will probably want her on your team at the start for a long time. And you can't use 2 of the same character on a team. So because of that, she gets knocked to A tier for rerolls. However, she is still very strong. She is a support unit. And what she does is, with her main skill, she gives a buff to every ally that increases their critical rate by a flat 25%. This buff lasts until the end of battle, so it's a permanent buff. It's not timed. And it stacks up to 100%. So she's basically giving a ramping crit rate buff to everyone on the team. Critical strikes do a base 50% more damage, and there's ways to improve critical damage, like her burst gives a critical damage buff to all allies. It's not permanent, it only lasts 2 turns, but you get the gist of it. She is a very strong support unit. She is, as of this point on the Japanese server, still one of the strongest support units for pure damage. So she's very good. However, with the meta for launch, she's kind of unnecessary because you're beating everything in a couple turns anyways. However, that doesn't make her not really good still. She is just kind of unnecessary until harder content comes into the game. So that's why she gets an A tier, not an S tier. If there was content that needed her, and if it wasn't for the other Resna taking up the slot in your team, she would be S tier. She's very, very good. She's definitely an A+. All right, so our final 2 units, Sophie and Pravda. They are here because they are in the first banner, which is very likely to be a week after launch. And you may want to hold off on your rerolls until this banner comes. These units are limited. All of these characters up here are in the permanent pool. You will likely get all of them eventually, just incidentally. I have everyone except Risa in 4 months free to play on the JP server, so it's like you will get these units like eventually even free to play, and if you're putting any amount of money into the game, you will get all of them fairly quickly. And like I said earlier, dupes don't matter at all. Dupes for characters are quite bad. So you may want to consider waiting a week to start and reroll for Sophie, because Sophie is SS tier. She is still a meta unit. Despite being the first limited unit released, she is still a very strong all-rounder meta unit. She is one of the best defenders that the game has. Her kit is just very good. Defenders are very good against harder content because they mitigate RNG by drawing all attacks to them. She has very good sustain. Her fast skill heals herself. More healing if she's lower on HP. Her second skill has one of the wildest debuffs in the game. It lowers the enemy's resistances by 30%. All resistances. So she's basically buffing all of your attackers. Very, very good. Most units only debuff 1 or 2 resistances at a time, so they're only good like within their own elements. Sophie does all of them. And she just has very good tank stats. She will go in every single team for a long time. She is just a very good unit, and she's limited. So you may want to consider waiting off and rerolling for her when she comes out. And then Pravda, she's an AoE breaker. She gets B tier. I don't know. No one really uses Pravda that much, but she's decent. But yeah, Sophie, definitely the best to reroll for. First limited unit. Very, very, very good. Now, I do say limited, but they're not exactly limited. Like they are. The banner is only going to be like a week or whatever. But a few months into the JP server, they added all limited characters back to the pity shop. I don't know if we're going to get that right away on global or if it'll be a few months out. But either way, if you miss a character that you like really want, don't worry. They will be coming to the pity shop, so you can get them at any time as long as you have enough pity currency. Pity currency transfers between banners. It stays forever. So you can just roll as much as you want and stack it up. So yeah. And rerolls themselves only take about 2 minutes. Rerolling is very quick. Another reason why it might be good to wait for Sophie, because at least as far as the JP server went, if you rerolled on day 1, every reroll was a single multi. You only got 10 pulls. If you waited for Sophie, every reroll was like 3 multis, so 30 pulls. It made your rerolling experience a lot smoother. So yeah, consider waiting for Sophie if you're free to play, for sure. And that's about it. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, just leave a comment below. And yeah, I hope you all have fun playing Resleriana. It's a great game. I love it. Thanks for watching.